Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler, a guy who has an integrated understanding to offer about the whole situation of our species on this planet and why it is that things have developed in such difficult and challenging ways since we first stepped onto the path of civilization. But I'm focused right now on this immediate moment, which is, I think, should be recognized as historic. It's been quite extraordinary what's happened since Joe Biden announced that he was stepping aside and then endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris. I don't think anybody saw this coming. I'm calling it a tsunami of passion. A lot of other ways we could talk about it, but it's just been remarkable. The transformation that's taken place, all this Zoom calls with 160,000 people in it, way breaking the record. The wave of endorsements that quickly came, the excitement showed by crowds, the tens of thousands of volunteers, the breaking of and the movement of the polls pretty much overnight. I actually would have liked to have seen that more dramatic, but I think that these kinds of things deal in the body politic doesn't all respond at once. There are people who responded right away, and an enormous number of people have responded right away. But the country as a whole is 330 some million people, and a lot of those people are not as tuned in, and so as the vibrations from this tsunami, if they can continue to ramify, which I think they can for 100 days, I expect that there's going to be further movement, considerable further movement. This is like a wave breaking on the shore. There's time elapsed between the first break and then the high water mark that we might get to by election day. Don't know if that, but it has been extraordinary. And people who are commenting on it are saying, well, I've not seen anything like it. Now, I want to say that the fact that this is extraordinary means that some unusual cause is implied by this very unusual effect. And it's worth our looking at what that cause was. And I would like to propose what I think is the essence of it. But living in the midst of this kind of history, well, we're probably in a better position than future historians are to be able to interpret it, because they're going to look back and they're not going to be as tuned in as we are, who have lived through these Trump years. Let's just put it that way. That we have lived through a whole sequence of things and find ourselves, we found ourselves up until Biden withdrew, having a dread of Donald Trump regaining the powers of the presidency. And we've been through so much having to do with Donald Trump that, on the one hand, he offends in so many ways because he manifests all the defects that a person can manifest. I mean, he's quite extraordinary that way. I can't think of any human being who basically has a strong suit in every human character defect. I mean, he's a liar, he's a bully, he's greedy, he's cruel. I mean, just the whole gamut of the things that a person shouldn't be, he is. And we've been experiencing this man belittling our country and damaging our country, and now threatening to turn our country into a whole different ugly kind of society. For years, I mean, he got impeached twice, and he got if he wasn't impeachable, no president would ever be impeachable. I mean, he was about as impeachable as you could imagine. And he got acquitted because of what his political party had become. He got away with what he did with Ukraine. He got away with inciting an insurrection. It's been, and now he's coming on with his Project 2025 and his intentions to use justice as a way of getting retribution against his enemies. We've just seen this whole thing, and he just keeps on coming. And after the acquittal and the impeachments, how he keeps on getting away with things. I mean, the Supreme Court of the United States made an absolutely scandalous decision after a scandalous bunch of delays. I mean, they're basically siding with the criminal against the rule of law. Who would have thought that would be possible? We're witnessing the destruction of the American form of government with Donald Trump and with all those things allied with him, the senators that acquitted him and the Supreme Court that became his accomplice. And then he gets the luck of the draw in Florida. I mean, oh my gosh. People say it was just like an open and shut case. Any other person would have been in jail, 2 years ago with the Florida case. That's what the experts in the field say. And that case has just been thrown out by this judge that he appointed, who's basically just been like the Supreme Court, just working for. I mean, we've been witnessing this. And here he comes, not only getting away with being a one-man crime wave, being rewarded for it by giving the power to transform American democracy into a more or less authoritarian state. I mean, what could be scarier than that? And so there's been that feeling of impotence, that this thing that threatens so much of what we hold dear about our country, threatens to destroy it and replace it with all the ugly stuff that fascism always brings and that Trump brings in abundance. I mean, he doesn't conduct himself except to befoul things. He doesn't, he doesn't do bad things to hold on to power like some dictators and then embark upon trying to accomplish this or that, which some dictators do for the benefit of the development of the country. He's never shown a bit of interest in doing anything to make the country better. And and as of a week ago, with Biden still being at the top of the ticket, America had in general assessed that the pro-democracy side is just not going to be able to do the fighting. I mean, not only was his performance at that June 27th debate, concerning about, what is, your general state, how is it, what does it mean that you can take the stage in such an important situation and not have your game be any better than that? What's happening? But in addition to that, this was a situation where we were seeing the battle we've been losing, that we should have been winning, that we were winning with Jack Smith, and the trials that have been held, and he was found accountable with Jean Carroll and sexual assault and defaming. He was held accountable with the hush money case where he committed crimes in order to cheat for an election. So there were some victories, but there was so much that was not. Who would have thought that anybody would be able to commit those crimes, have a good prosecutor like Jack Smith, get real judges like Judge Chutkan, and not be able to conduct a trial because the fascists already control enough of the Supreme Court that they would delay the thing, and then they would eventually hand down this completely bonkers notion that the most, somehow the Constitution tells us the most powerful person in the country is supposed to be able to commit crimes without much chance of anybody being able to hold him accountable. Yeah, that's the kind of Constitution we got. That's what the Supreme Court basically said. Nobody thought that the Supreme Court was that far gone, but they show that they are. So it's really very discouraging. Okay, all right. The laws, people kept on saying the court's not going to save us. I really wanted the courts to save us, and they tried, and they had some minor successes. But the Supreme Court and Judge Cannon, the most serious crimes that the guy has committed, he wasn't going to be exposed to the American people for having committed them by a trial. But people said, okay, the courts aren't going to save us. It's only the voters are going to save us. Well, if we aren't going to be able to show the American people what they really needed to see about how this guy is basically trying to overthrow the constitutional order, committed the most serious crimes in American history, if we're not going to be able to show them that, what's left to us is our champion going toe-to-toe with this guy and exposing him for what he is, going mano a mano and besting him. But in this June 27th disastrous debate, we once again experienced that our side wasn't going to be able to fight and win. And that extended to what the evidence showed about the probability that when we got to November with Biden on the ticket, we were going to win and protect with American democracy at stake, not just your average Republican like you want. Maybe you want Mondale to beat Reagan in '84, or maybe you want Dukakis to beat H.W. Bush in '88, et cetera, a normal American election. No, this was like life and death, basically, the death of the America we love, or its survival. And the futures markets and the polls were sending out signals of, well, it looks like this guy who's told all these lies, that's committed all these crimes, that has said all these things about where all he wants to do in making us a more fascist, unjust society. And he's going to be our next president? So if you look at it through that prism of all what we've been through about, this guy does the worst possible things and threatens the worst possible things, and yet he keeps on winning. Not all the time, but to an amazing degree. Whoever would have thought that something like his insurrection, followed by you're likely to win an election. I mean, the Supreme Court also basically neutered that component of the 14th Amendment, which the decent judge in Colorado, having conducted a fairly thorough investigation, declared that, yes, indeed, Donald Trump had committed an insurrection. He was an insurrectionist. in the proper interpretation of that part of the 14th Amendment, which says that an insurrectionist can't run for office. And she held back from, not to get too much into the weeds, but then the higher court in Colorado basically made the finding that Donald Trump, by virtue of his being an insurrectionist, wasn't allowed to be on the presidential ballot because he's not allowed to hold public office again. But then the Supreme Court did another, well, not quite as grotesque an atrocity. After all, even the Democrats on the court didn't want to have the court be the ones to take him off the ballot. That's another issue about, I mean, isn't their job really to enforce the Constitution when the meaning of the Constitution is really clear enough? I mean, we did see this guy try to overturn an election and call a mob to Washington to help him do it. Do we really need to parse any of the ambiguities in some way in order to say, well, it's okay for a guy who blatantly violated his oath of office to be able to take the oath of office again that the Constitution requires him to take? I don't think the Constitution means that. But that's the Supreme Court we've got, which again, it's a sign that we're in really deep trouble. We really need to win this election to not get into, like we're in trouble, but we haven't fallen all the way down to the bottom of the pit. We need to win that election and then also keep fighting. That's another thing. I mean, this tsunami of passion isn't about feeling burdened by all we got to do. But if we remember, this is what we've been through. And then you get Biden stepping down on Sunday, and soon thereafter attempting to pass the torch to his vice president, Kamala Harris. Now, people have talked about what a good job she's been doing as a candidate, and I agree entirely. I am very favorably impressed. If she can keep this up, I think we're in for some good times. But I don't think that Kamala has anything to do with this magnitude of I'm overstating. The tsunami manifested itself before Kamala Harris had a chance to show that she was indeed ready for prime time. So I say, let's look at the causes of the tsunami as mostly independent of what turns out to be the excellence of the candidate. Though I think that she has helped to build it by she continues to make it plausible. But immediately, we no longer had an 80-something-year-old man who had shown some kind of signs of some age-related stuff. I still don't feel quite clear what the picture is of his capacities and his incapacities. I'm confused. But I did see some video of him back in 2012, for example, talking, and his ability to talk has eroded rather significantly. I don't know what that means. I'm a few years younger than he is, and I'm not everything I ever was, but I don't have trouble talking as well as I ever talked, and most of the people. Anyway, so that was just one sign that was of concern, and so we were about to go into battle with a guy that 72% of the American people said they thought that he was unfit to occupy the presidency for age-related reasons for the next 4 years. 72%. So whatever you conclude about how with it he is and how able he is to do the job and how I had thought that it was had been thought that it was a pretty decent bet that the guy who gave that State of the Union address back in March and who has accomplished all that he's accomplished, I found it easy to believe that he was in fact competent. But I don't really know exactly what it was. But whatever I might think, I knew that, and the country, the democratic world in general, sort of understood, if not in detail, then in general spirit, that the rest of the country, the 72%, which means also a lot of Democrats, in fact, the polls showed a lot of Democrats thought he was too old to, that we were encumbered with that. And that was no small thing. Not only does it mean that it looks likely that we're going to lose an election, we absolutely must win. But we're going into battle against a guy that I think we can say with some confidence, the great majority of American people do not want what he's selling. To the extent to which the battle is, in fact, between democracy and fascism, and I think that's the essence of this particular presidential election. I think that there's evidence that 32% of the people, actually, of the American people, actually want a strongman, authoritarian, dictatorial kind of government, where the power of the leader is not checked or balanced by anybody. 32% is a little scary. I don't know what it was when I was growing up, but I never really thought it was like that. But in any event, it's not enough to win an election. But if you want to win the election, it really helps to have an alternative who people will see as, if you want the American democracy to succeed and thrive, vote for this Democratic candidate. And if you want to reject this MAGA fascist stuff, which 2/3 probably, lean in that direction or are strongly in that direction, you don't want to give them a reason to perceive their choice otherwise. And if you got 72% of the people thinking that the Democratic standard bearer represents some of the unfitness for office, that might reasonably be thought to really compete with, I don't like this ugly stuff that Trump brings. Well, I also don't like this, That's not a small thing if they don't think that the guy's fit. It's very fundamental to how we think about leaders. We don't want them too frail. We don't want them disabled in terms of being our protectors in the world and conducting our business effectively and protecting everything that we want protected, which the commander-in-chief does. So when Biden stepped down, what that represented was a reconfiguration of the whole election. Now it's not the criminal versus the unfit, which we might well lose, particularly if the unfit is not good at prosecuting the case against his opponent. As it looks like, Biden was never all that was not his forte. The Democrats have long needed more of a fighter. That was why Obama the powers of the presidency were largely taken away from him by the obstructionists. he wasn't the fighter that the moment needed. You can look up Schmuckler and Baltimore Sun and Obama, and you can see that less than a year into his administration, I was saying, don't forfeit the battle that we need you to fight. And that's where Kamala comes in. Not only did we get back onto the playing field with a young, intelligent, and articulate former prosecutor, but she started to show that she's ready to bring it on, she said. Bring it on. Let's go. I know his type. I've prosecuted sexual assault criminals like he has been adjudicated to be. I have prosecuted fraudsters. She's taking the battle to him, and she's doing it well. So that has expanded. This transition that we made at a deep emotional and spiritual level from dread and despair to all of a sudden hope and a feeling of strength. From the feeling that, oh my gosh, the Supreme Court is handing down complete BS decisions in order to give this would-be dictator the room to commit crimes. Oh, I mean, who would have thought we'd ever see anything like that? But here is now a woman who's stepping onto the battlefield that's got him completely flummoxed so far, it seems. And he's backing away from the debate. Oh, doesn't that give us pleasure to see him chickening? It's a reversal of the battle. Our champion, our previous champion, handed the wrestling match to a new and more capable fighter. And that was so exciting. I mean, we're witnessing what is essentially in our politics right now. Not the politics I grew up in America was not good versus evil. I mean, good versus evil always enters into just about everything in the human world. But the world of the force of Eisenhower versus the force of Stevenson in the 1950s, well, it wasn't good versus evil. This election basically is, and the Republicans have been evolving from the early 90s till now, ever more into embodying my definition of evil, which is a coherent force that consistently consistently spreads a pattern of brokenness or consistently makes the human world worse. You can see the Republican Party becoming that way from the time of Gingrich and Limbaugh, Fox News and W and Karl Rove, and the complete obstruction across the board. You can see the deterioration and the theft of a Supreme Court seat. This was not our father's Republican Party. You could see the transformation. And it was increasingly embodying that kind of a coherent force that everything it does makes things worse, which was a remarkable thing, never seen before. Well, I couldn't name not any party in American history, but I can't, in any advanced democracy, I cannot see any party that's been so thoroughly an agent of brokenness is what this Republican Party has become in these times. And that, to me, is something to look at as evil. And we were looking at a future just a half year away in which the guy with every character defect and every malign intention would be taking the most powerful position in our country and throwing out the structures, norms, laws, constitutions that have been the source of so many blessings we've had as Americans, the freedoms that we've had, that people speak their mind, that they have, that one person's religion isn't foisted upon everybody else like happened with Dobbs. we're fighting for a concept of America, which is sacred to, I think, well, sacred to a lot of us, and which 2/3 of the rest of the people, at least, have a positive feeling about. And we are about to lose it. Now, now we can see. We can see the battle so clearly, which wasn't the case back in the 90s and wasn't the case when W was president, which is why I spent all those years trying to warn about what was gaining ground on the Republican side and on the need to fight it so that it doesn't take over the party and to be allies of the better parts of that party. And anyway, it was, but now we see it. And now we face it. We've seen from that dark day in 2016 when somehow, surprisingly, thanks to James Comey in large part and the Russians, Donald Trump won the presidency, all the way up to seeing maybe 6 months from now, after all that he has shown of what he represents and who he is. You know, the bully, the rapist, the liar, all that terrible stuff. The guy who doesn't give a damn about the country and the way he handled the COVID crisis, not to mention his betraying American national security with his extortion plot with the Ukrainians. I mean, you can't imagine a worse guy to give the presidency to. But America seems to have become so broken that it looked like we were going to hand that power over. Oh, maybe not. What a moment of, like, the storm breaking, the weight taken off of our shoulder. Dread and despair turned to hope. And having a warrior showing herself this week. I can fight this guy. I am good at this stuff. And she has been good at this stuff. And the decisions that she's making strategically. I mean, I don't know who exactly is around her, but I can see that they are playing it really effectively. They're using the memes for the young. They're coming up with organic responses from the crowds, like "We won't go back." She's characterizing Trump for the criminal that he is, and she's doing it all effectively. I mean, she seems to have a mastery of what her script is. Well, I didn't see that coming with her, I must say. I was a fan of hers in 2019, and then I sort of fell away. I don't remember exactly what, but I didn't end up with the positive feeling I had started with. But wow, look at this. So we have had this historical moment. I believe that in addition to its being historical, in that it gives us a glimpse into the state of consciousness in America, which is there are a whole lot of people who really do care that we save our democracy from this force of fascism, really do care. And then there are going to be, I think, a whole lot of Americans who, in the next 100 days, get roused to join with this force of embracing a positive way forward and rejecting this un-American, ugly, destructive thing that Trump represents and that the Trump party represents. We had been looking at, a lot of people were saying, who look at the figures, there's a real danger that in 2025, the Republicans would control the White House and the House and the Senate, not to mention what we already know about the court. The force of fascism would control the country. That would be a nightmare. But now, for the first time maybe ever in this generation-long rising force of fascism coming to this showdown, for the first time ever, it looks like the Democrats may have as their champion on the battlefield somebody that's up for the fight and good at it. Even before Obama, who was not up for the fight, he wanted to, he kept extending a hand. It kept on getting bitten. He kept on extending the hand. There was a need for a fist once you find out what you're up against. That's the title of my 2015 book, What We're Up Against. You got to recognize what we're up against. She does. She understands what's being done to women with the abortion decision. These theocrats with their misogyny. She understands that. She understands what's being done in terms of undermining democracy by robbing the most vulnerable people of their voice, disenfranchising them. And she's willing to fight. But even before Obama, I was saying, a warrior in the political arena, which I think we now have, but haven't had. In 2004, John Kerry got swift-boated. He wasn't ready for what the Republicans are and do. Neither was Biden. He kept on wanting to have bipartisanship. I mean, he incorporated all the Republican ideas he could into his Obamacare. Didn't matter at all. They just wanted him to fail. He didn't respond to them as though they were enemies. Kamala Harris, she's ready to fight. And that makes a lot of difference. It's hard to win against an enemy without fighting. If they insist on being your enemy, which they did, for example, with Obama, they weren't going to work with him to get some kind of good measure for health care. They were just going to try to make him fail. You got to fight. And we have needed a fighter for more than 20 years without having one. Now we have one. And I think the battle is winnable. The reason that this force of fascism has become so powerful is that the opposing side, the liberal side, the democratic side, the pro-democracy side, has not really fought. It wasn't Joe Biden's forte either to fight them. I mean, it was good that in the 2022 election, he took the field to say that democracy was being threatened by this MAGA stuff. He was very careful to make a distinction between, MAGA Republicans and the Republican Party. I wouldn't have made that distinction myself because I'm a fighter in this battle because of the way I see it. The MAGA Party, it wasn't just a little posse off on the extreme. They control the party. You can see it in the House of Representatives. You could see it back then that whatever the MAGA party was the Trump party, and if Trump insisted that the dogma be that the election had been stolen from him, the whole Republican Party took that position. And if anybody wasn't willing to go along with his insurrectionism, like Liz Cheney, she'd be kicked out. Why make a distinction between the MAGA party and the Republican Party? They are the MAGA party. And they need to be fought and defeated. I think that Kamala Harris knows that. And Joe Biden, I mean, I love the guy. I feel that both Obama and Biden are these wonderful people who, if they had had the good fortune to have a Republican opposition to deal with, that was like in olden times when I was growing up, Everett Dirksen in the Senate, and Bob Michaels in the House of Representatives, and you know, everybody knows that these Republicans don't deal with the Democrats anymore like they did all the way up into the '80s or through the '80s. This is a new kind of politics, and it requires not talking about your friends across the aisle. But Biden in his soul is somebody he wants so much for people to be their better selves and for the good people to cooperate. And it's been hard for him to be up against he's been called an election thief, a criminal, the Biden crime family. I mean, he's been treated terribly by the Republicans, saying he stole the election and being, the big lie. How would a fighter have dealt with that? Well, he and Obama just are such decent people, not really given to hand-to-hand combat, up against this extraordinary thing that the Republican Party has been becoming. Kamala Harris is a change from that. I think that there is a chance not only that we'll win this thing, but that we will tap into that whole big majority of Americans who don't want Trump or the Trump party's offerings. Look at the polls on abortion. Look at the polls on common sense gun regulations. Look at the polls on a whole variety of issues. And it's an index of where the center of gravity is in the American body politic. And if we fight the fight, I think we can get that. The kind of percentages that we get with, abortion being the decision for the mother and not the government to make, and, basically. And for it be background checks and banning assault weapons and stuff like that. I think that and term limits, which on the Supreme Court, judicial ethics, we get big majorities on a variety of issues. And they are an index into the American people in general wanting to preserve the liberal, pluralistic, democratic society with the rule of law that we've got. And it can be had. It hasn't been that what the pro-democracy side represents that's been weak. It's that the fighting has been weak. And I think that this tsunami of passion will grow across the country. It may not stay as intense as it's been in this first week, but there is an army gathering, and it's going to get only bigger. And I think we can not only win it, I think we should aim for a blowout. If she can make all the right strategic decisions, which looks like she might have a group around her that among them that they can do it. It can go from strength to strength. This Trump gang is ugly. The ugliness can be exposed. The great majority of Americans will choose it, choose to reject it, and will choose the better possibilities of American politics and society and culture and values and the system of government that our founders bequeathed to us. Well, thank you for listening this long. the forces at work in America today that our attention's being called to is part of a much larger picture of how forces of wholeness and forces of brokenness are continually embattled in the human world and can be shown to be what they are. I would, if you found interesting how I think, I would commend to you, well, my website, abetterhumanstory.org. I lay out an integrated picture of the forces that are at work, what we're up against in Trump, what we're up against in the Trump party, what we're up against in the rise of the fascist force globally, and what we have been up against since our species took the unprecedented step of stepping onto the path of civilization, which I define as those societies that are created by a creature that extricates itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically. First time in the history of life, 3.5 billion years that ever happened, by inventing its own way of life, because evolution has reached the point where there's a creature with the creative intelligence to be able to do that, which had never been done before. But it has unforeseeable or unforeseen ramifications. It gives rise to a systemic force. It's very problematic, and I show that, and that's the. I was planning to spend today presenting that idea, which is really, I think, foundational to understanding fundamentally what's happened to our species. Our current American drama is worth understanding on its own terms, but it also can be seen in terms of a larger picture that I think is worth absorbing into our understanding of our situation, because I think it increases the chance that we can get our act together. Our civilization has always had a major part that's out of control and that's disordered, that in which a destructive force inevitably arose and has driven civilization into some real difficult paths of brokenness. And if we understood what all the ramifications of that, then we'd be better able to overcome that force of brokenness. And right now, that isn't what I chose to do today, because we're in a contemporary form of that battle, where America has gradually been witnessing the ever greater power of a force of fascism that has reached the point that only a week ago, it looked like that force of fascism would overtake our country and end the American democratic experiment. It's an ancient battle, but it has all the concrete characteristics of this particular piece of human history. And this week in America, the force of wholeness, which wants people to be free to live their lives according to their beliefs. It wants people to have a voice in their government rather than to be tyrannized by their government. It wants their government to manifest wholeness also by acting responsibly to defuse the gathering crisis of climate change for the good of all the generations to come after us and the health of life on Earth itself. All these forms of wholeness are aligned on one side of our divide. That's why I say, if you look at the actual forces at work, you see a lot about a force of brokenness versus a force of wholeness. And that translates pretty readily into something that's reasonable reasonable to call the force of good versus the force of evil. They actually do exist as coherent forces in our world, and that's part of what my Better Human story tells. First, there's the unleashing of the destructive force, and that gives rise to something that moves through the human world over the generations, centuries, millennia, that can be shown, a coherent force, which acts very much the way evil did. But here we have in America a drama. And I don't know what to thank, but I am not a praying guy. But there are parts of me that I find breaking into silent prayer about what will happen with America in this showdown that's coming up. And it is so freeing. It is so filling of the heart that our forces are now advancing. Even after the immunity decision, even after Judge Cannon, we're going to hold this guy accountable. We're going to persuade the American people to keep this guy out of power. And then, by the way, there are trials to be held because he ain't going to be able to kill him. The contest of Donald Trump versus the rule of law has been way more competitive than I would ever have guessed. From the beginning of his presidency, I kept on overestimating what the rule of law would do. This guy, he's done amazing things defeating the rule of law. But I hope again that the rule of law will have the last victory. But even more important, the powers of the presidency will be in the hands of someone with a vision of wholeness for which she has passion. And this tsunami of passion will support. Thank you. Bye-bye. If you would subscribe, follow, send this link to other people if you think they'd be interested. And take a look at my website, abetterhumanstory.org.